Today, I want to share something truly historic, something I never thought I would witness in this lifetime. For the very first time in the West, a Devi has been consecrated. Yes, not just a temple, not just a form, but a living presence of the divine feminine. Ling Bhairavi Devi has been installed at the Isha Institute of Inner Sciences in Tennessee. When I heard Sadhguru speak during the consecration, I realized this is not just a spiritual event, this is a cosmic moment. Because what has entered the Western soil is not a philosophy, not a practice, but Shakti herself, vibrant, alive, radiating grace and fire. As someone deeply drawn to the sacred feminine, to Devi in all her forms, I felt a sense of wonder and a silent reverence. And it made me reflect on the path of the great yogis who came before Vivekananda, Yogananda, Osho, and others. They brought wisdom, they brought clarity. But what Sadhguru has done is something utterly unique.
Let's begin with a look at history. Swami Vivekananda, with thunder in his voice and fire in his soul, captivated the West at the Parliament of the World's Religions in 1893. He didn't just speak, he ignited a movement. He introduced Vedanta, not as philosophy, but as a living force, and challenged the West's materialism with the clarity of ancient wisdom. Then came Paramahansa Yogananda, serene yet blazing with inner light. He arrived in the roaring 1920s, the Jazz Age, bringing with him Kriya Yoga and the revolutionary idea of self-realization. His book, Autobiography of a Yogi, became a spiritual classic, read by presidents, rock stars, and seekers alike. Through him, the West met not just India, but its own inner soul. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi followed, charming the world with his disarming smile and his vision of peace. He introduced transcendental meditation, a simple, powerful technique that found its way into boardrooms, universities, and even the Beatles' inner circle. He wasn't just teaching meditation, he was exporting silence. And then, there was Osho. Osho was a thunderstorm wrapped in silk. Wild, fearless, and utterly uncontainable, he defied every spiritual stereotype. He challenged Gandhi's morality, Freud's repression, and Buddha's detachment, all in the same breath. In the Oregon desert, he raised a utopian city, Rajneeshpuram, complete with its own police force, farms, discos, and a Rolls-Royce fleet. He spoke of love, death, and silence with piercing insight and unapologetic flair. To some, he was a mystic genius, to others, a dangerous rebel. But all agreed, he was unforgettable. Yet, for all their impact, for all the ideas, practices, and awakenings they seeded, none of them consecrated a living deity. They lit minds on fire. They opened hearts. But they didn't bring down the divine into a physical, energetic presence. None of them performed the rare and ancient act of prana pratisha, the mystical science of installing a Devi, a living goddess, in stone and space, making the invisible palpable. That is a whole different order of work. A leap from teaching to consecrating the sacred itself. Because for the first time on Western soil, a Devi, not a philosophy, not a technique, but a living Shakti, has taken root. Not metaphorically, literally. And that is no small event. It marks the beginning of what Sadhguru calls a powerful wave of devotion in the Western Hemisphere. Western spirituality has long leaned toward the masculine, logic, control, structured practices. But now comes Devi, untamed and grace-filled, shaking the very foundation of how transformation can happen. She does not ask for belief, nor does she seek your philosophies. Just sitting in her presence, something begins to shift, not in thought, but in being. That is the beauty of consecrated energy. It works silently, like fire. It doesn't preach, it simply burns. While earlier yogis planted seeds of wisdom, Vivekananda, Yogananda, Maharishi, Osho, Sadhguru has done something radically different. He has installed a living force, a Devi, not to be admired from afar but to actively work on one's energy, karma, and very structure of being. And perhaps, that's exactly what this age of overstimulation and excess needs. Not more information, but transformation. So if you ever find yourself near Linga Bhairavi, whether in the ancient soil of India or the heart of Tennessee, sit with her. You may not understand it. You don't need to. But one thing is certain, you will not leave untouched.
Place to talk about what consecration means. What does consecration mean? What do you consecrate? I mean, what is that? What is that process and what is it achieved?
See, this is happening everywhere around you. all the time. One form of existence or one form of energy is transforming itself into another. What is mud is becoming flower, fruit and food, isn't it?
Yeah.
What is filth is actually becoming a flower.
Yeah.
What is stink is becoming fragrance. It's happening. If you eat the food, this food becomes, from what was just a grain of rice, becomes such a sophisticated machinery like human body. So, if you make mud into food, you call it agriculture. If you make food into this, you call it digestion. If you make this into mud, usually we call it cremation or burial, whatever. So if you can make a stone or some other gross substance, a material substance, into a divine reverberance, into highest, subtlest possible reverberance, that's called consecration. So the whole existence is doing it all the time in different levels. So this is a certain science and a technology through which you transform the grosser elements into finer elements. Unfortunately, this was always mistaken as producing gold. The alchemy of the West is always talking about producing gold. Gold has no worth except in the market, okay? It's only greed which makes a man go towards gold. The Indian alchemy never talked about making gold. Indian alchemy always talked about making grosser elements into finer substances, making a stone into the divine. So the whole Indian alchemy is like a consecration process. Right now, there is an agricultural science, right?
Yeah.
They will teach you how to study the soil, the qualities of the soil, the seed, the manure, everything. So they only set those conditions. They will set the soil conditions, they'll set the seed condition, everything else that's necessary to grow. But the growth itself, the transforming earth into food, that no scientist does. That is happening by nature. Here also the same thing. We have a whole science. If we set all these conditions, the growth becomes subtle.
Swami Vivekananda came to the West with the thunder of Vedanta, proclaiming that the divine is not in some distant heaven, but within every human being. He awakened strength, dignity, and spiritual confidence, teaching that self-realization is the highest goal. Then came Osho, a mystic like no other, who shattered dogmas and dared the world to experience truth beyond belief. He gave the West the courage to feel, to question, and to dissolve boundaries, declaring that enlightenment is not about renunciation, but total awareness. And now Sadhguru arrives not with just words or teachings, but with something far more rare, a living presence. Through the consecration of Ling Bhairavi in the heart of America, he has not offered a concept or philosophy, but Devi herself, a powerful, vibrant force of transformation. Vivekananda gave clarity, Osho gave freedom, Sadhguru gives the living energy of the divine feminine. Together, their work marks a journey from wisdom to inner rebellion, to raw presence. And now, for the first time, the West is not just thinking about this divine, it is breathing her in. The time for philosophy is giving away to a time of presence. In the gaze of Ling Bhairavi, you don't need to understand, you only need to receive.